I've been reading about the Sultana, a steamship on the Mississippi River that blew up and caught on fire and sank in the greatest maritime disaster in United States history. It was supposed to hold, I think, about 350 people, 360 people, and they packed 2,100 onto it. And what makes it even more tragic is that a lot of these people were prisoners who had been held at Andersonville, which was a horrific prisoner camp in the American Civil War. So they're held at Andersonville, and then the war is almost over. So they are put on trains, but of course the railroad system has been pretty much destroyed. So at one point, one of the trains derailed and fell over 3 times in one day, killing many of them. And then they eventually get to Jackson, Mississippi, and the train line has been completely destroyed. So all of these men who had been starving for years now have to march 40 miles. And then there's a bureaucratic mix-up where this was not a prisoner release exactly, it was a prisoner exchange, but the Union officers didn't want to release any Confederate prisoners because the war was still officially going on, even though it's more or less over. And so they're still stuck in a prisoner of war camp, except now at least they're getting fed. And then finally, people come to their senses and say, no, we just have to get them back home. And then, unfortunately, the steamboat owners are paid by the government, by the passenger. And there should have been, like I said, 360 people on there. But there was at the time a scandal over people getting paid additionally to look the other way when extra people are pulling on. And there were so many people on board that people were not able to lie down to sleep. They would be sleeping, leaning against a bulwark or whatever you call them in a boat. And at one point there was a photographer came out in a canoe to take pictures of them. And so many people came over to get in the picture that the whole steamboat started to list, and they had to tell everybody to get back. So it was just a disaster waiting to happen. Plus, boilers were always exploding on the river. The boilers were made to last. It wasn't a problem with the design of boilers. The problem is that nobody bothered to filter the water that went into the boilers. And so they were using Mississippi water, which, as we all know, anybody who's ever even seen a picture of the Mississippi knows that it's muddy. And so they're putting in very muddy water into the boilers, which is clogging boilers. And so explosions were a routine thing. Anyway, one of the boilers explodes, the ship catches on fire, people start jumping into the water, which, by the way, I believe it's April. And so it's very, very cold. So there's hypothermia is a real problem. But anyway, they're fighting. They're at least smart. Before they would jump off, they would break off a piece of wood and throw it in, like break off the railings or something and throw those into the water and then jump and try to hold on to it. But there are more people than there is pieces of wood. So they're fighting over that. And then there's a story about this one woman who was standing on the deck, and she starts yelling, presumably doing the mom voice to get people to listen, of, you stop fighting and look, you go to that piece of wood, you go to that piece of wood, you go to that piece of wood. She's taking care of them. And they actually listen to her, and they start, instead of drowning each other, they start actually grabbing onto pieces of wood and acting in an orderly fashion. And then they tell her to jump, and she says no, because as soon as I stop telling you what to do, you're going to go back to doing what you were doing before. And she burned up, still giving instructions. And that reminds me of another story from a few decades ago, where there was a plane crashed into a river near the Boston airport And it was cold, it's January or something, and they're doing helicopters to lift people out. And they put a rope down for this one guy, and he grabbed it, and then he said to a woman, "No, you go first." And she went first, and then when they put the rope back down, he was gone. He had drowned or died of hypothermia. And I think about situations like that a lot, and I wonder, what, we all have a way that we believe we would act in those circumstances, and we all think that we would, act in such a way as to, we hope we would act honorably. And what is it that I know it's just a movie, but there's a line at the end of Saving Private Ryan where, I'm going to spoil it for everybody, but where the Tom Hanks character says to the Matt Damon character, make your life worth it. And because everybody has sacrificed for him. And, if you could pick and choose, like, if I was in a circumstance where it was either me or somebody else, and if I could pick or choose such that, and I knew I had information that the other is a 7-year-old kid who someday is going to, save 300,000 acres of land from industrial civilization and, bring the salmon back and bring the buffalo back and bring the prairie dogs back. It's like, oh yeah, I would do that in a heartbeat. But how do I know that this 7-year-old kid isn't going to grow up to like murder 6 people? Like, and you don't know. So you're doing, your action is based on, and it's also what's right in the moment when your life is, when this is it. It's not like you can make a little sacrifice. It's like, oh yeah, you can go in front of me at the line at the grocery store and then I can feel noble. I mean, and it's, actions like that have always profoundly moved me, as I think they profoundly move a lot of people. And there's no point here. It's just that I was reading about the Sultana last night and was profoundly moved by that woman. And she's dead. And she gave, she helped to save other lives in her dying.